So how is the day going for everyone so far? Okay, not enough enthusiasm. We need more coffee. How's the day going for everyone so far? Woo! Everybody learning something, meeting some great people? Yes? Should we do it again next year? Should we do it even bigger next year? Awesome, awesome. Well, hi everyone. My name is Ha, and I'm a product partner at Omidyar Network. So I spent the first 16 years of my career after business school as a product leader in Silicon Valley. Started really early at eBay in 2000, and then after eBay joined 4 early stage startups where I led the product teams. And then I moved over into venture. So if anybody wants to learn a little bit about my path to venture, come find me afterwards. But today I'm really excited to introduce Amy Jo Kim. One of my roles earlier in my career was a company called Betfair, and it was a peer-to-peer betting marketplace. And I had come across Amy back when the social gaming space was really hot and there was a lot of activity in it. And Amy was just wow as a speaker. And so she's incredible and we're so excited to have her here. A little bit about Amy. She was named by Fortune as one of the top 10 influential women in games. She's a world-renowned social game designer, community architect, and startup coach. She's worked at some really amazing companies such as eBay, Netflix, and a number of really cool gaming companies. And then throughout her coaching practice, Amy has helped entrepreneurs and innovators find their product market fit through game thinking. She pioneered the idea of applying game design to digital services, and she holds a PhD in behavioral neuroscience from the University of Washington and is currently an adjunct professor at the USC School of Cinematic Arts. So we're in for a real treat. Please join me in welcoming Amy Jo Kim to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, handheld?
Oh, yeah.
No, I've got, okay, hello. It's so awesome to see you all. How many people saw Wonder Woman? So coming to this conference is like that scene in Wonder Woman where you come around the bend, you see all the people training and fighting and fierce, and you realize they're all women. So it's awesome to see you. I'm so excited to share with you some of what I've learned about how to bring successful products to life. Okay, so this is the Game Thinking Roadmap. It's actually not the Thinking Roadmap, that was a misprint. And I'm going to show you how you can use this to increase your mastery at being a product manager. You can go to gamethinking.io/WIP right now and grab an interactive PDF handout that will let you follow along. How many people value doing even more than thinking? I do. So this is for you. This is a workshop. I'm going to move fast. Take it home. Start to fill it out. Let me know how it goes. gamethinking.io/WIP, okay? So what is game thinking? Go ahead and you can download that while I'm explaining this to you. It's a combination of game design, agile and lean UX, design thinking, and most importantly, systems thinking. How many people think that those 4 things are really interesting for product managers? Just curious. Yeah, me too. And the reason I think that is because I see them work. So I found that this is a way of doing faster, smarter innovation by engaging your customers on a mastery path rather than manipulating them, tracking their behavior, etc. So there's a lot of people that are proponents of game thinking. You'll notice I didn't use the G word, gamification. That's really a different thing. Kathy Sierra, how many people know Kathy Sierra? Awesome. She's one of my heroes and colleagues and friends. Upgrade your user, not your product. That's really the idea. Make people better at something that they care about. Eric Ries, accelerating your innovation cycle. Going through the build, measure, learn cycle quickly. But it turns out what you build and who you test it on can have a dramatic impact on that. Ralph Koster. Has anybody read A Theory of Fun by Ralph Koster? So this is for everybody, not just gaming. He's, again, a dear colleague and friend. He says fun is another word for learning. That's kind of the punchline of this whole talk. And in 30 minutes, you're going to know way more about that than you do right now. So I'm a game designer and product designer, and a startup coach. I work with startups and teams all over the world. I've worked on some products and for some brands you've probably heard of. And I help teams build social experiences that drive long-term engagement. If you're working on something where long-term engagement is important for you, it's part of your business model, it's your aspiration, then keep listening. This is for you. So probably in your life you've had different work experiences, and have you ever gotten that call that kind of, when you look back on it, it changed everything? You know, maybe it was for school or a job or, you know, a beloved. This was that call for me. One day I was in Half Moon Bay, where I used to live, looking at the ocean and having lunch with this startup CEO, Alex Rogopoulos, the CEO of Harmonix. And he told me about a vision he had for a game where people with no musical talent would play plastic instruments and feel like they were in a band. And so I got involved on the ground floor bringing Rock Band to life. And lots of people told us we were nuts. It was not a sure thing. And those were conditions of extreme uncertainty that I know many of you operate in as well. And I learned a lot from that and some other experiences. It ended up that we created a breakthrough hit, something that defined its own genre. And I went on, and this was my foot in the door to work on more breakthrough hits in a variety of both games and products, Lumosity, Happify, Covet Fashion, perhaps you've heard of those. I also did design work for major brands on mission-critical apps, games, and services. And I did a VC-funded brain games startup. Right across the street here, there's a beautiful building, and in 2007, I heard a keynote by the head of Nintendo about Brain Age, which was a brain games on the Nintendo that was selling hardware to 70-year-olds in Japan. So we decided, with my background in neuroscience and gaming, to launch a brain games startup. That was a ride. Boy, did I learn a lot. And was also able to then use that to help me work on Covet Fashion, which became an evergreen mobile hit game. Happify, which is the leading digital mental health app, now expanded both in consumer and in enterprise. Play, an online toy rental service that's been growing rapidly. You don't have to have all those Legos, you can rent them. And that really showed me, working on these products, what's really needed for breakthrough innovation. Not the platitudes, what's really needed? How does that work from the ground up? So I'm going to share with you, I'm going to share with you 4 game thinking tools that are specifically useful for product manager. Now, I work with cross-functional teams, designers, CEOs, product managers, engineers, all the cross-functional teams that you probably work with too. But these are the tools that, as a product manager, these can end up getting you 10x the effectiveness and speed out of your early innovation cycles. And that's why I want to share them with you. So, have you ever looked back on a project and said, we may have listened to the wrong customers? Anybody? Honestly, me, so many times. Turns out that finding the right customers to listen to at different phases of your product can determine whether you thrive or fail. I have seen this repeatedly. Here's one story. Does anybody recognize this gaming platform? It no longer exists. It's called Siftio. And these were award-winning cubes put together. It was a gaming platform, really cool. The cubes knew about each other. The demo was amazing. And I worked with this company closely along with my design partner, helping them develop their first round of products. And they really struggled because we did testing and we found out that the people who badly needed this particular platform were special needs kids, autistic kids, kids with sensory issues. But they wanted to go mainstream and big. So they put a lot of their venture money into launching in Brookstone with big ads one Christmas, and they're no longer in business. Now, Happify, I mentioned earlier, they had an idea at first, a particular gaming-inspired idea, and we did a bunch of testing and we found out it was the wrong idea. And there was this other audience that was really kind of desperate for what we were building, that were recently out of the workforce, stay-at-home moms, type A's, really liked achieving. Now they were going to, nail motherhood, right? But they were a little blue. They were feeling a little loss of identity, a loss of meaning. I'm a working mom, I can relate to this. So we found that they were going to be our great early adopter audience, And it caused a lot of internal pivoting, but it ended up being a huge success. So the first tool is to find and leverage your passionate, high-need early customers first, not your target market. Paul Buckeye runs Y Combinator, knows a few things about startups, awesome guy. Likes to say, create something that just a few people love, even if most people don't get it right away. That's this in a nutshell. Now, to understand this, you need to understand innovation diffusion theory. Back in 1961, Everett Rogers, a scientist at Bell Labs, published a theory about how innovation spreads in societies and cultures, and it follows this bell-shaped curve. Some years later, 30 years later actually, Geoffrey Moore published Crossing the Chasm. How many of you have heard of Crossing the Chasm? And it's based on Everett Rogers' data. And he introduced this idea of a chasm between your early adopters, the people who need your product so bad, they would put up with friction and cost and bugs because of the need, with the early majority, who often look like the early adopters. They think it's cool. They think it's such a great idea. They don't have a burning need. That's a really important thing to understand, because this gets into who you listen to and who you ignore, and this can be the difference between thriving and failing. So, a few very specific, concrete tips. Don't rely on friends and family. Hopefully all of you are smart enough you don't do that. I can't tell you how many startups I've coached come in, they raise a little money, all they've done is friends and family validation. This often doesn't go well. Also, there's this idea that you should just like get a slice of your target market, study your target market, size your target market, pull people in from your target market, test on. That's what Siftio was doing with their target market. But if you don't start with the slice of your target market that's high need and high value, which is a small number of people, if you don't start there, you're making it much harder to achieve product market fit. You should define who your early adopters are, test early with them, based on customer need, and on two things: the increasing value over time they give to you, and the increasing out value over time your product can give to them. So let's take a look, boots on ground, how do successful innovators actually do this? Here's some stories. First of all, understand your superfans, that's shorthand for high need, high value early customer. They're very specific to your product. They're not just gadget geeks. So on Rock Band, our target audience was party gamers and people that like DDR, but our superfans were these very intense, deep rhythm action nerds who already had played Guitar Hero, knew the basics. It was confusing to me at the time, but we actually needed to partner with them to bring the first systems to life. On The Sims, there was a similar thing going on. I worked with Will Wright for years, and how many of you played The Sims? So before it was The Sims, it was like people told us we were crazy, it looked really messy, we weren't sure if it was going to work. And who we tested on was this group of simulation enthusiasts, not our target market, these early high-need superfans that were really fans of Will, but they really, really like to make things way more than your average bear. And so they were incredibly valuable to us, not just in testing and tuning the original systems, but in populating beta with content. Then similarly on Play, the rental service, we found that we were getting really mixed signals about an idea that we were validating, because Play was already in motion. They had a fast-growing service. They wanted to do a major extension. So we found that there were certain people that really needed that we were able to test the idea with, and then do in 4 weeks what we had budgeted 3 months for, once we got that feedback. This works in enterprise as well. One of my clients, Megan, who you'll hear about a little later, Megan Berwick is the CEO of Sunreach, did a major pivot on her project by finding superfans for an idea who turned out to be completely who she thought they weren't. It surprised her, it was hard. She's now making 3x what she was making then by putting that knowledge to work. So here's the game thinking roadmap. This is what I'm going to take you through. The first idea here is that test your earliest ideas, not with your target market, not with your friends and family, but with your superfans. And I'll show you how that works with the rest of this shortly. And you want to start there. Start pre-chasm. And a good way to think about this is these are people who have the need you're meeting, know they have the need, don't need convincing, and most important, are already taking steps to try and solve that problem or meet that need, because that's the real sign. So you don't want to start there if you're innovating, if you want to build something new. So now, how many of you, if you have your downloaded template, I'm going to take a few seconds and tell you how to fill this out, and you can go back with your team and fill it out too. So this is just an elevator pitch, but what this does is it forces you to write down your current hypothesis about who your superfans are and what need you're solving of theirs. So in the interest of time, I'm going to keep going, but let me tell you about this. Say we are developing one line, what you're building, for who? You know, women 30 to 50, no. Product managers 30 to 50, way too broad. Something really specific as you can. And you don't know who it is, that's why it's a hypothesis. As long as it's testable, you're good. And then the next one is to do what? What is it that they care about that your product's going to do? So this is a very brief version of a more detailed thing we do in the game thinking approach. So that's your first one. Focus on finding and leveraging a small handful of superfans early. This can 10x your effectiveness when you put it together with these other tools. The second is the mastery path. This is engage your customers with learning and skill building. Now, a lot of you, I bet, are interested in habit design and habit building and how you reduce churn and build habits. A lot of that, there's a lot of great stuff in there, but a lot of it is operant conditioning, which is manipulating behavior. I'll talk more about that in a moment. This is a different approach. This is what makes something game-like but not gamified, which is an engaging experience where as you get better at it, it gets better too, which really describes what a game is. So here's where you say, what is my customer's end-to-end experience? You've done journey maps. There's lots of kinds. This is like a journey map, but you're headed toward mastery. Learning is the through line. And then how does that evolve over time? There's discovery, which is for newbies or visitors. There's onboarding. Well, discovery is for visitors, people who haven't committed. There's onboarding. By the way, all of you are going to get the slides. There's onboarding, which is for someone who's just committed and they're learning the ropes. There's habit building, that's a different stage. That's your day 21, your day 30, your day 40 experience. What's the thing that pulls you back? What's the session, as we say in gaming, or the experience that you have? And then the thing that makes this game thinking is mastery. It's what do you have for the people that have mastered your systems and want more? Once someone's mastered skills, knowledge, relationships, then what? How's your day 60 experience different than your day 30 that's different than your day 7 experience? What does that path to mastery look like? How many of you are familiar with Slack? Let's bring this to life by looking at how Slack does this. Discovery is very social. Now it gets assigned more by IT, but a lot of people find out about Slack through their friends, through their colleagues. Oh, you got to come in here to my channel. Onboarding is actually very game-like because Slack is a multiplayer collaborative environment, and onboarding is a single-player experience with a friendly, helpful bot, which describes the training level of many console games. Those of you who have played that know what I'm talking about. And that's how you learn the ropes. It's safer than being in a multiplayer environment. Habit building in Slack is really all about customization. You read and respond to messages, but you learn more and more and more how to make Slack just right for you. And then mastery continues on the theme that's been set and developed throughout Slack's mastery path, which is customization. For mastery, you can launch your own channel, you can program a bot, you can even integrate your app into the API. It just keeps going deeper. But it's not a collection of random features. It's all organized around a red thread, a consistent through line of giving people the tools to change Slack to be better for what they need it to be. So that's a good example of a mastery path. Notice, not a game mechanic in sight, just really strong design. So, let's switch gears a little. Have you ever looked back on what you were doing on a project and thought, oh, I think maybe we built the wrong MVP? Anybody? So, I sure have. We all seen these cartoons, right? This is how you build an MVP. It's functional, There's another one, you don't do it with parts, you make it function. You can take a slice through this, and I love all these graphics. But when you sit down to actually, with your team, to say, okay, what are we going to build? It's hard to translate that into what you build. So let me give you an example of how thinking about your mastery path can help. Robin Allenson is a serial entrepreneur, CEO of Similar.ai. And he built a little polished game to do a sorting function, which he needed to train his back-end AI algorithm. Those of you in AI know what I'm talking about. And nobody was using it. Everybody said that it was beautiful. Everybody said they loved it, everybody being his friends and family and et cetera. And there was nobody using it on day 30, not to mention day 7. And he was trying to figure out why. So what we did was we went back to basics, found superfans who really needed the stuff that his algorithms would do, and built something very rough, and got into a low-fidelity, highly iterative prototyping cycle, thinking about what do these people need? It turns out they were fashion designers. And what is it that they could provide if we gave them a path to mastery? That whole thing completely changed what he was doing. It made it all take off. He's now got tons of data coming into his system, and this active group of people in an online community using his rough beta software and thanking him for it. That's what a superfan is. So, you don't boil the ocean. A lot of people that get excited about gamification and mastery paths get all excited about building mechanics. That comes later. That's the icing on the cake. You think through, what is it that somebody's experience is going to be on day 1, day 7, day 21, day 30, day 40, day 60? And if they get better at your system, what gets better for them? And so I use a tool called Job Stories. We don't have time to go into it today. How many people use Job Stories? Awesome, you should teach everyone around you. But I use it, and here's an idea. Those of you who know Job Stories, sketch out your mastery path as a set of job stories. Use your research, your customer research to influence it. There's one I call a habit story. This is one of the golden nuggets you can take away. If you can understand, not from testing, but just from generative customer research, meaning problem space research where you're understanding who you're targeting, if you can understand their existing habits, the ones that your product could make better or replace, you can use that to 10x your ability to get product market fit. So writing a habit story is something that, it's also in your download. You can start sketching some ideas if your mind is sparked, or after this session, think about it, okay? Think about what that might be. Think about if you've done research, what habits people have that you could piggyback on. Now let's talk about the learning loop. This is not a compulsion loop or a habit building loop. It's habit building, but this is a loop that's structured around learning. And this is actually the secret of what really makes games compelling and what makes most long-term engagement compelling. Dan Cook, who's an amazing game designer, likes to say, in a loop, you're learning a skill and updating your mental model. That's the thing that leads to player delight. So, in The Sims, which I mentioned earlier, we worked for over a year on finding the fun. Tiny, ugly, lo-fi world-building experiments. Just finding the place where it would really start to gel. Now, you don't have to do that, but you can do a little bit of that and get great results. And the question here really is, what's the right MVP to start with? A lot of people say, oh, it's a fake landing page. But now that you know what the mastery path looks like, you know that that's testing discovery. Your landing page tests your discovery phase, your marketing message. That's great. That has nothing to do with product market fit, if you could even pull it off, what the thing that's going to pull them back on day 21 is. You could never do that and spend all day on testing your landing page. Now, if you create an operant conditioning loop, or we call it a Skinner box. This is, you'll see this at the hooked model, the power of habit. There's a lot in habit building. It's about manipulating behavior, getting compliance, they say in medical. So there's some sort of cue, external cue. There's some sort of routine behavior, often unconscious. And then you reward that behavior in order to shape it, right? That's your basics operant conditioning 101. If you do that, you're doing what most gamification does, which is just micro manipulations. It turns out this will usually work for a few weeks, and people are like, woo, it's working. And then it stops working. You see this in animal training. You see this in product design. You see this everywhere. This is a short-term strategy. You'll never get long-term engagement. In fact, it can harm your long-term engagement. For that, you need skill building. You need a way, however it is, to make your customer better than they were before. So the core loop, the learning loop, is the way you do that. Let's look at Slack for an example. The first thing is an engaging activity. That's the heart of it. If there's no there, you can't drive engagement. There has to be some activity that's engaging. In Slack, it's reading and responding to updates. It's that core little activity that you do that gets better over time because you get better at doing it. And there's also an internal trigger, an emotional trigger, not an external one. For Slack, it's pretty much FOMO, like, what's going on with my team? I better log in. There's feedback. Feedback and progress, but most importantly, feedback. It's much more fundamental than progress and all the progress mechanics you've probably seen. But you can't get better at something without feedback, so there needs to be some way for the system to say, yes, you've done it right, or steer you if you've done it wrong, so you get better. For Slack, it's the no more updates, and they even have a variety of little cute sayings to say, oop, you're all done, no more updates. That's the end of that cycle. It's really important, even though it's simple, that you have that feedback. Let you know you're on the right track. And then investment and engaged triggers pull you back. Investment is where you get more and more, you put pieces of yourself into it. And the most effective investment is a system, not random features, like little manipulations. And in Slack, it's the customization system. It's a core system. You see more and more of it as you get better at using Slack. And an engaged trigger is a trigger, an external trigger that you can't wait to go back and check because you have an internal urge. So it's not just some random notification you wish would turn off. It's checking your stats. It's checking your unread messages. It's seeing if so-and-so responded to your slightly risky DM, etc. That's an engaged trigger. And that's where you want to be, and Slack has that in droves. So skill building is the art and science of making your customers more awesome. Upgrade your customer, not your product. The learning loop that I just gave you a quick sketch of is the actual mechanics of how you can make your customers more skillful. It's guidelines for putting that into place. And here's the punchline. The smartest MVP you can build, if you want to drive long-term engagement, is a learning loop. It's much easier to build onboarding, much easier. But if you build beautiful onboarding and go, oh, it looks great, let's ship it, and you have no interesting thing to do at day 21, you've just spent a bunch of money on a leaky bucket. And this is the way to avoid that. Start with this piece. This is how every brilliant, successful game designer I have ever worked with works. They call it finding the fun, but that's really what it is. You're bringing engagement to life from the ground up. So that's where you want to start in this chart. Along the x-axis, you see the mastery path. And here, this is where you want to start. You want to get started with your learning loop. If you can, use habit stories that you got from research to inform that. That's something that I've shared a lot more about. You can go and look at my videos. And here's your template. Those of you who downloaded it, or if you download it later, go ahead and fill in as many as you can of what's here. And you'll start to see, here's the pieces of my learning loop. And that starts to answer the question of how you take all those fun graphics and turn them into an actual feature set for your MVP. So let's put this all together. What should you build? You're a product manager. What should you build? Who should you be listening to for feedback on that, and at what stage? Where's the roadmap? Here's the roadmap. If what you want to build is deep engagement, you follow this roadmap. And this is real. I'm going to take it apart in a moment. This quote I love because it really sums up why we're all here and what we want to do. Is we want to make mistakes earlier in the process because it's so painful once you've shipped or once you've poured a lot of heart and soul into art or any of those things. You want to use the eraser on the drafting table. You want to run those smart, early lo-fi experiments. So in a typical play testing progression, you test with your team and department, then the infamous friends and family. I've worked on dozens of projects that do this. Then you might run a closed beta, maybe open beta, and ship to who you hope is the early majority. What's different about game thinking? It's super fans. You start early by testing this narrow slice of high-need customers. You don't end with them. You move through them. They are your enablers. The mistake people make is they think that means they're going to be niche. Nothing could be further from the truth. And you test them early as soon as you've got something, even before. And then you use them as influencers, ambassadors, people that could even be like elders throughout the playtesting cycle. And how do the best game designers actually do that? Let me give you some very frontline stories from my own experience. So in Rock Band, we thought about early what it means to live out a rock star fantasy. We had 2 or 3 competing ideas. One was sort of gritty and real, because there were a lot of people on the team that actually were touring musicians. And one was really outrageous and almost cartoony, and they had different implications for the system design. So we imagined it. We imagined the path to mastery. But then we spent 6 months in a little room with the windows papered over and spit and baling wire instruments, just refining one song, just getting one song to feel good. It was torture, but it worked. On The Sims, we spent all this time early on imagining, well, a dollhouse come to life. That was the idea of what could that mean? What would the core systems be? Is it competitive, collaborative? Are there groups? Is it single player? All those things, right? We imagined all these things. We ran all these little experiments. We imagined how it would play out. And those experiments, the ones we thought were going to be really great, weren't the ones that ended up being great. And our super fans are an important part of showing us which ones people kept coming back for more. On Covet Fashion, early on we imagined a cooperative dress-up game. You guys should check out Covet Fashion if you haven't already. It's a lot of fun. You can also play it with your kids. I play it with my 10-year-old, so I love having a game like that. Anyway, we imagined a cooperative dress-up game based on real-world, hot off the Paris and London runway fashion, which is what we ended up building. But when we were imagining it, there were lots and lots of models for what co-op could be. The team was full of co-op game designers, and I was the creative director on that team initially, sort of corralling everybody. And they had a lot of experience with, 4-player co-op and Left 4 Dead and all these different models that are pretty complicated. And we wanted this to be a mainstream game. So what happened is we did some research, and we found out that a lot of women love to do what's basically 2-player co-op shopping and dressing, meaning they have a special friend, mom, sister, coworker. And when there's a big event, they'll text, or when they're shopping, they'll text a picture. Which earrings do you like? Or which dress should I buy, the blue or the green? Or can I come over and raid your closet? How many people in this room ever had an experience with a woman like that? Yeah, me too. 2-player co-op. So we said, wait a minute, what if we just built something way simpler than anything else we're thinking of that mimics what they do in real life? That feature's still in the game today, and that was 4 years ago. So part of the punchline here is don't fall in love with your ideas. Have a vision for sure. But this early iterative lo-fi testing is really how things get better and better and better. Stage gate theory is a corporate innovation theory that really expresses this so well. Those of you who don't know about it, you can go read up on it. We cover it a lot in our programs. The way this works is early on, you've got many ideas. Those dozens of world-building experiments Will Wright did, all the experiments we did on Rock Band. These little ideas, you're running little experiments. And then there's a gate, and some of them are really good, and those get through. And then there's another gate, and some more of them are good. And by the end of this process, you're going to ship something. But you've learned a lot along the way. And I think this is reminding us of why we're doing this in the first place. As product managers, we really, really don't want to spin our wheels, building things our customers don't want and need. It's the whole premise of lean startup. It's the fundamentals of any good design. It doesn't matter if it's beautiful if it's not what people want and need. And that's what these tools can do for you. So let me sum it up. These 4 tools together are useful. If you put them all to work, you will see extraordinary results. The first is test your ideas with high-need, high-value early customers, your super fans. Sketch out a coherent path to mastery. Think about it. Maybe have a few where it could go different directions. But don't build all that. Don't boil the ocean. But think about it. What's that day 60 experience? Start your development not with onboarding and not with all the mastery fancy stuff, but with the core experience, the most common thing people are going to do, get that working. And then use this roadmap to manage what you work on later. You work on onboarding when you need it. You work on discovery when you need it in your overall experience. So if you found this useful and you want to learn more, at gamethinking.io, we have a Game Thinking Academy, several programs, a lot of free resources, and you can go there. In particular, check out our masterclass. I run it once a year along with my assistant coaches, and it's coming up in just 2 weeks. It's all online. If you love this and go, oh, more, M-O-A-R, that could be something really powerful for you. So I would welcome you to connect with me. Please tweet at me. Tell me what you think of this. Tell me what could be better. Tell me what you're working on. Send me an email. I'd love to hear from you. And right now, what I'd really love is questions. So first of all, thank you. Thank you for being here and listening.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amy. Okay, so we have probably about 5 to 7 minutes of questions. We have been using Slido.com. Enter Women PM to type in your questions. So we'll go ahead and read off some of the questions that have come through. So Amy, Nicole asks, what specifically would you recommend us to do for our clients in the habit building phase?
So to answer that, I have to know a lot more about your project, first of all, because there isn't a one-size-fits-all answer. But the most important thing that I can share that does work for everybody is study and understand the existing habits of your superfans before you've pitched them what you're building, to understand the problem that they have, and then turn that into focused, coherent habit stories, which are job stories built around a habit. There's a lot more on the design side around how you actually construct a learning loop. But having worked with hundreds of teams at this point, finding those bits of habits that are in people's lives already before you've pitched them is gold that you can't get back once you've started to show them what you're building. So take advantage of that.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, our next question comes from TS. How do you think of building new features? Is it for the super fans? Is it for the regular fans who might not be as loyal, but they may be just a bigger pool to work with?
So there's who you build a feature for, and then there's who you test it on. So depending on your stage of development, you might be building features for regular people. If you've Play is a good example. You know, Play, when I started working with them, the toy rental service, they had 16,000 registered members and about 9,000 active, meaning subscribers paying monthly. And so that was everybody. And they wanted to build a new, very large and important feature. But we tested the feature on superfans. Because superfans are the canary in the coal mine. Superfans are where the rest of the people will be in 18 to 24 months, sometimes sooner. So testing on them gets you all kinds of wins. So I want to differentiate between who you build for and who you test for. Sometimes you build features for your superfans, but you can get crazy on that too. Like I've had clients and they love their superfans, they were in touch with them, they built all the features for them, and their growth was stalled. So you need to, again, know how to move through them. And let me answer the question about what my favorite game to play is. Because I used to be a professional musician and I love music just with all my soul. So I love music games, rhythm action games, singing games the most. I love dance games and all those forms of artistic expression, and I love collaborating with other people in them.
Okay, great. For our next question, and this is one that as a longtime product leader, I've had this pain all too well. So how do you convince more senior executive stakeholders to buy into this process and this theory, especially if they're sort of old school?
So there's a lot of different ways to do that. Well, I'll mention a few. The most important thing is small wins, small visible wins. So finding a project where you could get a win and bringing a stakeholder along for the ride, particularly a project that makes them look good, strategically can get your foot in the door to get a lot more done. So I've seen that work. I've also seen that not work, but I've definitely, like, that can work. Another way is to give them lots of updates with small sets of meaningful choices. So a lot of game design ends up being small sets of interesting, meaningful choices. Like not too many choices, not too few. So, you know, the classic, here's 3 things we could do that you might say to an executive. You know, I did this recently with an executive team that was very skeptical. One thing I did was I sent them a weekly update. Here's what we did, and here's what we learned, and here's what we're trying this week. And every week they'd say, here's the experiments we're running. And then they were like, okay, I see how this goes. And then we got this data from the experiment, so now we're running this experiment. And then the other thing that helped them is I would then ask them, I wouldn't say, what do you think? I'd say, okay, we had these 3 things that we could do. Which one do you think we should? And any of them was fine. And then the executive's like, I made a choice. So those are some of my tricks.
Awesome. I love that. Next question. I'll just broaden this a little bit more. Differences between sort of applying this to a consumer versus an enterprise or a SaaS type of business.
Works great for enterprise. I have several enterprise clients right now. So the element that's the same across consumer and SaaS is what you're essentially doing in a nutshell here is you're creating a learning architecture for your customers. You're deciding what to roll out to them when. You're doing just-in-time teaching of features when they're ready for them. And if you've got a complicated product, you know, that's really a great thing to be able to do. So it's incredibly relevant for that. Now, some people, most enterprise product designers don't think about this too much, which is why when I work with them, I get amazing results. But all the things that I showed you absolutely apply to enterprise. You just have to go through the process of gathering the data you need to make the design decisions. And someone also said, is onboarding needed if your product is truly intuitive? Onboarding isn't about the UX. Onboarding is about learning the ropes and feeling part of something bigger than yourself. You always need onboarding. Anytime people, if you have a multiplayer environment, if you have single player, meaning there's no people and no social interaction at all, maybe there's a different issue. But I mean, the project I did with Netflix on onboarding was we were looking at the 2-month experience because that's where there was a drop-off. And so we really looked at and modeled just the whole first 2 months as onboarding. So I hope that answers the question.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Amy, for spending the afternoon with us. I think we learned
It's a pleasure.
some amazing things that we can carry back to us at work tomorrow.